everyone, comic book reviewer here. This time, reviewing on Bratz, Girlz Really Rock. Now, as you know, Bratz Girlz Really Rock was a 2008 computer animated musical film, which was meant to be the 11th film in the Bratz film series and the next entry in the whole Bratz Rock Angels timeline, which is meant to similar in the same fashion to Bratz Rock Angels, explain to how the Bratz came to their next fame of stardom, is meant to feature the Bratz at their last day of school, and we see how they get prepared for their day at summer camp. But of course, right away, we kind of see how the teachers pick favourites, we kind of see how they put them to impossible standards, and right away, this is meant to be a Bratz version of Camp Rock. And I think right away, it does point out the dangers of picking favourites, putting students to impossible standards, and so forth. And we do see how Chloe, Yasmin, Sasha, and Jade have to kind of see that their teachers don't really stop to think things through. We kind of see how some of them think to impossible standards. And we kind of see how, of course, the Bratz have to learn things the hard way. And I think the film does a good job in showing not only the dangers of picking favourites, putting your students to impossible standards, but the dangers of what could happen if it kind of corrupts them or makes them into a worse version of themselves. As we do see how a sort of ballerina student known as Anna ends up being put into impossible standards by her ballerina teacher, who wants to try and use her to try and get promoted by this big film director. And we do kind of see how Dylan does try to help her come out of her shell, try to help her be a better self. And I think it does show you beneath how Chloe, Yasmin, Sasha, and Jade treat her, Dylan's the only one who does try to help her to kind of come out of her shell, be a better version of herself, and so forth. But it doesn't come off as too enforced, and you do see how Anna has to kind of slowly see the consequences of how her ballerina teacher sees how her teacher's corruption has kind of made her to her worst version. And you do see her be a better version. And you do see how, the teachers at the summer camp don't show any concern or care, how their sort of ways of picking favourites, putting things to impossible standards, or trying to make them the worst version of themselves, don't show any concern or care for what could happen to their students. And I think it's one of those things that I think a lot of teachers don't show any sort of increasingly concern or how it might make them the worst version of themselves. And I think at the same time, it does show the dangers of what can happen by picking favourites, not thinking through your actions, and so forth. And I think it's one of those films that's obviously meant to be that kind of Camp Rock sort of similar storyline. And obviously having the Tweevils without Bradine makes perfect sense, as, it's clear Anna had that role of being almost like Bradine, but unlike Bradine, you do see how Anna realised her mistakes, and you do see how Dylan was the only person who showed her actual kindness. And I think it's one of those believable things where once a person shows you genuine kindness, you understand your mistakes. You want to be something better. You want to be a better version of yourself and not emulate similar mistakes by the people who misguided you. And that's a believable thing. And I think at the same time, I think having some teachers around you made perfect sense, as some of them were a bit of oddballs. Some of them kind of expected impossible standards. They didn't show any concern or care for your well-being or mental health. And I think it does show one of those sort of hard truth moral standards about being careful, and how, sometimes the wrong kind of teacher or mentor might end up making things unintentionally worse. And I think to me, I mean, to me, Bratz, Girlz Really Rock is one of those films that is trying to be self-aware. It is trying to remind you about being careful of how the wrong kind of teacher or student can kind of put you down on the wrong path or end up making you into a worse version of yourself. I think to me, Bratz, Girlz Really Rock is an okay film, but it's one of those films that obviously knows what it has to be. One of those hard truth moral films. It knows it can't really sugarcoat the dangers of picking favourites, but it has to remind you about being extremely careful. So I think it definitely deserves a thumbs up. Still good, and still alright. So, Comic Reviewer here, signing out.